The 17th BRICS Summit entered its second day in Rio de Janeiro. Key discussions centered on climate action, including COP30 preparations and global health. Under the theme, Strengthening Global South Cooperation for More Inclusive and Sustainable Governance, the summit has already seen progress. On the first day of discussion, leaders exchanged views on various issues, including geopolitical conflicts and rising trade barriers, and adopted the Rio de Janeiro Declaration. China has reiterated that trade wars have no winners, warning against rising protectionism. Beijing emphasized that BRICS is a platform for open cooperation among emerging markets and developing countries, not a tool for bloc confrontation. It also said the group does not engage in confrontation and is not targeted at any country. The statement comes after U.S. President Donald Trump accused BRICS nations of promoting anti-American policies and threatened to impose 10% tariffs on member states just one day before the BRICS summit concludes. We have our correspondent Paulo Cabral in Rio de Janeiro. Paulo, what's the latest from the BRICS summit and what's coming up in the final hours of the meeting?
Well, actually, the meeting has kind of ended here in Rio de Janeiro. We have the last event, which is a press statement by the host, President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, who's speaking right now. Just began a couple of minutes ago, in the beginning, just highlighting the importance of defending multilateralism, which is something that we have heard a lot during this 2 days of summit here in Rio de Janeiro. You know, with such a big group of nations, it's not easy to find common ground on many specific issues, but one thing that we see all countries defending is the need for multilateralism. They say that multilateralism is at an all-time low and that countries have to get together to sort the problems of the world. We are following here all the statements of President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva and will bring you updates as they come. But this last day of the BRICS meeting was dedicated to issues that are very important for the global south. Actually, President Lula in the opening statement said that himself, that they had to discuss today climate change and access to public health, which are issues that hit particularly hard developing nations. It is true here in Latin America. It is also true in Africa that these countries, our countries, are much more vulnerable to climate change impacts and also have a few lower access to public health issues, to public health resources. And what President Lula says, and that's the line that's been discussed here in the BRICS, is the second day, and how the global south can get together to both work on mitigation and strategies against climate change, and also how to widen the access to public health to the populations of these nations.
Well, Paulo, we've had the U.S. President Donald Trump accusing BRICS nation of promoting anti-American policies and threatening to impose 10% tariffs on member states. How are the BRICS members reacting to that?
Well, there was a rejection from all members that have spoken about it. We had a reaction from China directly from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Beijing, and saying that the BRICS is not against anybody, is not against other nations, but rather the countries of the global south getting together to discuss common issues and the solutions to them. We had a statement to that same effect also brought by a spokesperson of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Russia here in Rio de Janeiro, also taking that same line that BRICS is not against other countries, but rather a reunion of global south nations. And we also had the Brazilian officials speaking about it. The most vocal of them was the special advisor of foreign affairs of President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, Ambassador Celso Amorim, who said that the BRICS nations are not afraid of these kinds of threats, and even suggesting that this kind of statement coming from the United States, coming from the Trump administration, may strengthen the resolve of the BRICS nations to go against the kind of tariffs war that have been happening. This was in their statement issued yesterday. The joint statement that was issued on Sunday did not make any specific references to the United States, but it was quite clear that as the leaders were speaking, were making their statement about tariffs, they were very much making a reference to the United States.
For the African continent, Paulo, there is a keen interest in seeing which nations will become full members next. What do we expect in this regard?
Well, we have to follow this over the next year to see what's going to happen in the next summit. We have Uganda, Zimbabwe, Algeria, and Nigeria that are interested, that are now not full members, but that are partners of the BRICS group. And we have to see how this will go over the next year, whether they will achieve and be interested in full partnership. We do see statements both from Brazil and China supporting a broader participation of African nations in international forums such as the BRICS. I can speak particularly for Brazil, which I cover, that has got very important partnerships with Africa in the field of agriculture. For example, Brazil has, particularly with Portuguese-speaking countries in Africa as well, and the Ministry of Health of Brazil has also important partnerships with Africa. So we do see already some important things happening in terms of common work between African nations and Brazil and China, and so it would be the natural way for many of these nations to become full members of BRICS at some point in the future.
Paulo, thank you very much for that update. Paulo Cabral, live for us there in Rio de Janeiro. Now let's bring in Ovigwe Egwegu, a policy analyst at Development Reimagined. He joins us live via Zoom from Toronto. Thank you very much, Mr. Egwegu, for your time. The BRICS leaders have adopted the Rio Declaration, which reaffirms the BRICS countries' commitment to strengthening multilateralism, upholding international law, and striving to build a more equitable global order. How significant is this at this time of uncertainty and conflicts in the world?
Yeah, thank you for having me. It's a very significant commitment because, as you know, multilateralism is crucially important, especially given the ongoing multipolarization of the world. So if you have a world where power is distributed among several centers, you really need multilateralism because multilateralism is about a specific type of relationship between these power centers. They're able to sit together, discuss what the issues are, find consensus, and that's very, 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 very crucial, especially with all of the conflicts that we're seeing. But if we are going to look at BRICS and what it really does is that it's not just about different emerging powers coming together, is that they have a collective vision for the world, which is more equitable prosperity and shared development for most of the world. Is actually represented by the BRICS today. If you look at the population, it's about 40% of the world's population. The GDP of the BRICS is also growing, nearing about 40% as well. So it means a lot when its leaders come together to discuss the future of this global majority.
Right, let's talk about that threat by U.S. President Donald Trump to slap BRICS countries with an additional 10% tariff. He's accusing BRICS of having anti-American policies. First, is BRICS really about anti-American policies?
I think the first thing to say in this regard is that BRICS is not anti-America, neither is it anti-West. It's about the rest of the world coming together to take ownership of their challenges and to build solutions in an inclusive manner. One of those issues, or one of the issues that is top of the line for the BRICS countries is the issue of payment settlement, which for many years has been centered around US-built system of SWIFT and the dollar. I think that is what is really spoken the US president to make such threats. But if we are going to look at what BRICS is really doing, BRICS is not really about dethroning the US dollar. What it or creating its own currency. What it is doing is creating, a very inclusive payment mechanism where countries can trade, especially with special regard to trading in local currencies, because there's a history of weaponization of the dollar against countries big and small across the world, and using that in a geopolitical manner, or weaponizing dollar in a geopolitical way to sabotage economic development of countries. So to avoid that, there's a need for countries to build tools and mechanisms to facilitate trade between themselves in the local currency and not depend on the dollar. But President Trump and some people want to see the dollar remain undisputed champion of global trade. So, whereas not understanding that there's a risk that countries are trying to avoid in that regard.
So, how is this threat of more tariffs likely to impact developing nations like those in Africa that either already are BRICS members or are hoping to become members of BRICS?
Well, I think for African countries, BRICS is very crucial, especially when we're looking at not just even the payment mechanism, but also trade. a lot of the major economies in BRICS are huge traders with Africa. China, for instance, right? So we see BRICS as a platform where trade can facilitate trade with China, with Russia, the greater Eurasia, and even the wider developing world. So when President Trump comes with his threat of tariff of 10%, in a way, it's actually a climb down from the 100% tariffs he was threatening around the beginning of his second term. So I think that there is, in one way, a realization that that is not possible. Even on this 10%, I don't think is going to dissuade countries from moving ahead with cooperation under the BRICS mechanism, because this is about the long-term prosperity of countries. They want to be able to trade together, and they are going to go ahead with that. Most of the trade Africa countries have, or at least the BRICS African countries and partner countries have with the US, it's usually revolve around raw materials exports. And I don't think even Trump would want to put tariffs on his own self in a way by putting, because of his need for these raw materials.
And finally, what does the future look like for the new and upcoming members?
Well, I think one of the things, I mean, the main thing that everybody is looking at is, first of all, to ensure that BRICS serves the stated objective, which is inclusive economic development and prosperity for all countries. It tries to do that by creating these tools of both payment or facilitating trade. And now there's also the New Development Bank, which is also rapidly expanding. I think that has to be mentioned to one of the outcomes of this current BRICS declaration is how that NDB is going to be more proactive in lending and making sure that development projects across the world can get funding. So there is a lot of expectation, there's a lot of commitment to the BRICS grouping. And I think for developing countries, whether in Africa or elsewhere, the success of BRICS is going to be crucial for their own national development going forward.
All right, thank you very much for those insights. So Ovigwe Egwegu speaking to us there from Toronto.